Mustang Mare chained to the tracks with her foal, about to die. But something incredible happens. The sun was setting low, casting long shadows across the sprawling desert. A distant train could be heard rumbling in the background, a deep and steady rhythm as it barreled down the tracks toward an unforgiving fate. On the outskirts of this remote land, a Mustang mare stood shackled, her hooves dragging against the rusted chains that bound her to the very tracks. Her eyes, once filled with the fiery spirit of a wild creature, were now clouded with fear and desperation. Her name was Sierra, a wild Mustang whose ancestors roamed free, galloping across the open plains without a care. She had once known freedom, a life untamed and unbroken. But that was before the cruel twist of fate that had brought her here, chained to the tracks of an oncoming train. Her body was bruised and weary from days of struggle, but it was her heart, the heart of a mother, that beat the strongest. At her side stood her foal, a tiny, trembling creature that clung to her side. His fur was soft and golden, his eyes wide with uncertainty, unable to comprehend the danger that loomed over them. He nuzzled against his mother's side, seeking comfort, but there was no escape. The train was coming, and the chains were too tight. Time was running out. Sierra had no idea how long they had been trapped there, how long they had been waiting for the inevitable. It felt like hours, days, maybe even longer. But one thing was certain: death was closing in, and the end was near. Yet in that moment, as the wind whispered through the desert, something strange stirred deep within Sierra. A primal force, a flicker of something far greater than fear or despair. It was as though the very spirit of the wild had awakened within her once more. Her muscles tensed, her eyes focused on the distant horizon where the train's whistle echoed through the stillness. She knew she had no power over the chains that held her, no control over the steel rails that awaited her. But there was something else, something stronger. It was a mother's love. She looked down at her foal, the tiny creature who depended on her for everything. His innocent eyes looked up at her, trust and hope shining through his fragile form. She couldn't let this be their end. She couldn't let him suffer. A surge of determination pulsed through her veins. Her body may have been weakened, her spirit battered by the cruel hands that had brought her to this place, but she was still a mother. She was still a force of nature, and no matter the odds, she wasn't going to give up without a fight. The train was getting closer now, its massive wheels screeching as it hurtled toward them. Sierra's heart raced in her chest, but she refused to let the panic consume her. She could feel the hot breath of the oncoming train, smell the rusted metal and the scorching heat of its engine. But in that moment, something incredible happened, something no one could have predicted. A sudden roar of thunder cracked through the sky, louder than any storm. The ground beneath Sierra's hooves trembled as though the earth itself was shaking in response. And then, in the blink of an eye, something changed. A massive figure appeared on the horizon, galloping towards them with the speed and grace of a creature born for the wild. It was a stallion, one of the last free Mustangs, a noble beast with a coat the color of storm clouds. His eyes were wild, his mane flying like a banner in the wind, his hooves pounding the earth as he tore across the desert. It was as though the very heavens had sent him, a savior in the form of a wild stallion, determined to rescue the mare and her foal from certain death. He was strong, powerful, and relentless in his charge. The sound of his hooves on the ground seemed to reverberate through the air as he closed in on the scene. Sierra's heart skipped a beat. She could feel the energy of the stallion's arrival, a force that seemed to amplify her own resolve. This was their chance. This was the moment when everything would change. The train was almost upon them, its massive shadow looming over Sierra and her foal. But in the final seconds, as the stallion raced towards them, Sierra did the unthinkable. With every ounce of strength she had left, she reared up on her hind legs, pulling at the chains with all the power in her body. The sound of metal screeching against metal echoed through the air, but the chains held firm. She was trapped, but not for long. The stallion was almost there. With a mighty leap, he jumped over the tracks, landing in front of the train, his hooves striking the ground with a deafening thud. He charged forward, eyes locked on the train as it thundered toward him. For a brief moment, Time seemed to slow. The world held its breath. The stallion stood tall, unwavering, as the train barreled toward him with unstoppable force. But then, something miraculous happened. The ground trembled once more, and with one final burst of energy, the stallion kicked the train's path to the side, derailing its tracks with a single blow. The train skidded, screeching to a halt just inches from the mare and her foal. The air was filled with the sound of the screeching metal, the earth shaking beneath them. And then, in the sudden silence that followed, Sierra realized they were safe. The stallion stood tall before them, his chest heaving with the effort, but his eyes were calm and resolute. He had saved them. He had defied the odds and given them a chance at life. Sierra's heart swelled with gratitude as she nuzzled her foal, whispering words of comfort to him. The mare, once broken and desperate, now stood tall again, her spirit ignited by the stallion's courage and the fierce love she felt for her son. The wild spirit of the Mustang had been awakened once more, and as the stallion stood beside them, a silent guardian in the desert, Sierra knew they had been given a gift beyond measure, the gift of life, the gift of freedom, and the promise of a future filled with possibility. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting its last rays across the desert, Sierra and her foal stood together, strong and free. They were no longer bound by the chains that had once held them captive. They were free to run once more, to reclaim their place in the wild, and to honor the bond between mother and child that had saved them both. And so, as the desert winds whispered through the open plains, Sierra and her foal ran, their spirits wild and untamed, forever free in the vast expanse of the world that awaited them. The legend of the Mustang Mare, chained to the tracks but saved by a stallion's courage, would live on forever, a testament to the power of love, the strength of the wild, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. As the sun sank lower, casting long streaks of orange and purple across the sky, Sierra and her foal stood still for a moment, basking in the strange silence that followed the dramatic and impossible turn of events. The stallion, the one who had come from nowhere and performed the impossible, was now beside them, his mighty chest rising and falling with the exertion of his effort. His coat shimmered in the dimming light, his muscles rippling with every movement, a testament to his strength and grace. He was a sight to behold, a symbol of all that was wild and untamable in the world. Sierra, still trembling from the events that had unfolded before her, could barely comprehend what had just happened. She had been certain that this would be the end, that she and her foal would meet their fate on those cold, unforgiving tracks. And yet here they were, standing in the desert with nothing but the promise of freedom ahead. The mare nuzzled her foal, who seemed to have finally relaxed in her presence, his small body no longer trembling with fear. His tiny hooves were still, his bright eyes wide, yet now filled with a spark of curiosity. He looked up at Sierra, his young face reflecting an innocence that had yet to be tainted by the cruelties of the world. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sierra allowed herself to breathe, to feel the weight of her exhaustion, both physical and emotional, begin to lift. The chains that had once held her to the tracks were still visible, hanging loosely in the desert sand, their sharp metal edges glinting ominously in the fading light. But they were no longer a symbol of captivity. No, they were a reminder of the strength she had found in herself, the strength of a mother who would do anything to protect her child. She glanced over at the stallion, her savior, who stood a few paces away, his gaze locked on her with an intensity that was both comforting and awe-inspiring. There was something almost otherworldly about him, a quiet power that seemed to hum in the air around them. His eyes, deep and knowing, seemed to have seen more than Sierra could ever imagine. He was wild, but not reckless, free, but not lost. He was a creature of the earth, a creature born to run across the open plains, to live untamed and unbroken. Sierra could feel the unspoken bond that had formed between them, a shared understanding that transcended words. It was the kind of bond only found between two beings who understood the rawness of life, the depth of struggle, and the power of resilience. She owed him more than she could ever express. Yet in this moment, words seemed utterly insufficient. There was no way to thank him for saving her, for saving her foal, for giving them the chance to continue on in a world that seemed to take so much from them. The stallion, sensing the weight of Sierra's gaze, turned his head and gave a soft snort, as if to say that there was no need for thanks. His actions had been instinctive, reflex of his wild spirit, of the code that he lived by. It was the way of the wild to protect the vulnerable, to defend those who could not defend themselves. And Sierra understood that. She understood it deeply. The foal, still clinging to his mother's side, looked up at the stallion with wide eyes, unsure of this new creature who had appeared in their lives so suddenly. The stallion seemed to sense the foal's curiosity and took a slow, deliberate step forward. With a grace that was both gentle and commanding, he lowered his head to the ground, his nostrils flaring as he sniffed at the young one. The foal took a cautious step back, but Sierra, sensing no threat, nuzzled him gently, urging him to remain calm. Slowly, hesitantly, the foal stepped forward again, this time allowing the stallion to touch him with the softest of sniffs. The stallion's touch was tender, as if acknowledging the foal's innocence, his vulnerability in this harsh world. Sierra watched the exchange, a sense of relief flooding her chest. The stallion wasn't just a savior. He was a protector, a figure who would ensure that her foal grew up in a world that wasn't as cruel as it seemed, one where the wild would still be their sanctuary. It was a hope she had all but lost before today. And yet here it was, standing in front of her, in the form of this mighty stallion. For a long while, they stood in silence, the three of them, mother, foal, and stallion, locked in a quiet moment of shared understanding. The desert wind, ever-present and unyielding, whispered through the sagebrush, carrying with it the scent of the earth and the promise of what lay ahead. Sierra felt it in her bones, a deep knowing that life was far from over, that they were meant to live, to run, to be wild once more. The world was vast, and although they had been chained to those tracks, that was not their destiny. Their destiny was freedom. With a sharp, sudden motion, the stallion turned and took a few steps toward the open plain, his hooves kicking up dust as he moved. Sierra, instinctively, moved to follow him, her foal trailing behind. She knew that this was a moment, a turning point, a chance to reclaim the life she had lost, to return to the wild that had always been her true home. The stallion glanced back, his eyes meeting hers once more, as if to say, "Come." And without a second thought, Sierra obeyed. The foal, still hesitant but trusting his mother, trotted beside her, his small legs carrying him awkwardly, but with determination. Together, they followed the stallion into the wilderness, leaving behind the remnants of the tracks and the chains that had once held them captive. As they moved further into the desert, the wide expanse of land stretching out before them, Sierra felt her heart soar. The air was fresh, the wind cool against her fur, and for the first time in days, she felt truly alive. The stallion led them over hills and through valleys, his powerful strides taking him effortlessly across the rugged terrain. Sierra followed closely behind, her hooves kicking up the dry earth as they moved with the rhythm of the wild. The foal, growing stronger with each step, began to match their pace, his confidence building as he adapted to the landscape around him. Hours passed, and the sun sank lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the world. They continued to run, the sounds of their hooves echoing through the stillness of the desert. Sierra, though tired, felt a sense of freedom that she had long forgotten. The chains were gone, the fear was gone, and in their place was a newfound sense of power. Power that came from the earth, from the wild, from the very spirit that had always resided in her blood. As night fell, they came to a small oasis, a rare sight in the vast desert. The soft rustle of leaves and the gentle gurgling of a spring filled the air as the three of them approached. The stallion slowed his pace and dipped his head to drink from the cool water, his mane flowing like a river of silver in the moonlight. Sierra and her foal followed suit, drinking deeply from the spring, feeling the coolness of the water restore them. They rested there for a time, the desert night stretching out around them. The stars above shone brightly, more brilliant than Sierra had ever remembered them. The stillness was profound, and the only sound was the soft breeze rustling through the trees. The stallion, now standing guard a few paces away, looked out across the horizon, his sharp eyes ever watchful. Sierra and her foal lay down on the soft earth beside the spring, the warmth of the ground beneath them a comfort after the long, exhausting journey. In the quiet of the night, Sierra could feel the weight of everything that had happened. The chains, the tracks, the fear, lifting away. She no longer had to look over her shoulder, no longer had to fear what might come next. She was free. Her foal was free. They had survived the worst, and now they could live in peace. The stallion, sensing their relief, slowly lowered his head and laid down nearby, his eyes closing as he rested. Sierra glanced at him, a soft expression of gratitude in her eyes. He had given them a chance at life, and in doing so, he had reminded her of what truly mattered: freedom, family, and the untamed spirit of the wild. They were no longer bound to the tracks, no longer trapped by the forces that sought to control them. They were wild again, and that was all that mattered. As the night stretched on, and the stars twinkled above, Sierra closed her eyes, allowing the quiet peace of the desert to wash over her. Tomorrow, they would run again. Tomorrow, they would be free. And no matter what the world threw at them, they would face it together, wild and unbroken. The following morning, the desert was painted in soft hues of gold and pink as the first light of dawn spread across the horizon. Sierra awoke to the sound of gentle wind stirring the leaves of the small oasis. The stallion was already up, his form silhouetted against the rising sun, standing tall and poised, his mane fluttering in the breeze like a banner of freedom. Sierra could feel a deep sense of peace settle within her. The night had been a quiet reprieve, a pause in their relentless journey. The shackles of fear and uncertainty had fallen away, and in their place, she felt an unspoken promise of a life that was yet to be written, a life of freedom, of adventure, of survival. She glanced down at her foal, who was nestled close by, his small body still curled up beside her, his breathing slow and steady. He was no longer the trembling, frightened creature he had been the day before. The foal had grown in ways that only the wild could foster. His muscles were beginning to develop, his legs more sure and steady beneath him, his eyes alert and bright, a reflection of the world around him. The harshness of their circumstances, though terrifying, had begun to build something within him, something that could never be taken away. The instinct to survive, the courage to face whatever came next. Sierra nudged him gently with her nose, coaxing him to rise. His eyes fluttered open, and he looked up at her, blinking in the early morning light. He let out a soft whinny, his first sound of the day, and she nuzzled him affectionately, a soft sense of pride swelling in her chest. Together, they had made it through the night, and they would continue on, just as they had always done, as they always would. Sierra rose to her hooves, stretching her powerful limbs, feeling the pull of the earth beneath her. She was ready to run again. The stallion, sensing her movement, turned and fixed his gaze on her with that deep, knowing look. Without a sound, he began to move toward the open desert once more. Sierra, with a final nudge to her foal, followed suit. The foal, though still cautious, understood. He trusted his mother. He trusted the stallion. He followed her lead, moving with more confidence than he had the day before. The trio of wild souls moved as one, their hooves kicking up the soft desert dust, their silhouettes growing smaller as they made their way across the vast expanse. The desert stretched before them, a place of beauty and danger in equal measure. It was a land where the sun could burn with the fury of 1,000 fires, where the cold of the night could seep into your very bones. It was a place that demanded respect, that tested your will to survive with every step you took. But for Sierra, the desert was home. It had always been home, long before the tracks had chained her and her foal to the cruel and unforgiving steel. The open air, the wide, endless horizon, it all felt right, as if this was where she was meant to be. She could feel the power of the wild surging through her veins with every stride, her muscles working in harmony with the rhythm of the earth beneath her. The stallion led the way, his powerful body cutting through the desert like a force of nature, His speed was unmatched, his strength unmatched. Sierra followed closely behind, her foal now trotting beside her with surprising agility. The morning passed quickly as they covered miles of rugged terrain, crossing dry riverbeds and climbing steep ridges. There were moments when the foal stumbled, his legs still not quite able to keep pace with the long, graceful strides of the adults. But each time, Sierra was there, urging him forward, comforting him when he faltered, and offering him strength when his own seemed to waver. By midday, they had reached a wide plateau that overlooked a vast canyon. The air was hot, the sun beating down relentlessly, but Sierra and the stallion did not slow. They had come to a point in their journey where stopping felt like an insult to the freedom they had gained, to the life that lay ahead of them. The foal, though he was still young, had learned to match their pace, his small body growing stronger with each step. There was something exhilarating about the way they moved together, wild, untamed, unstoppable. As they approached the edge of the plateau, Sierra paused for a moment, her gaze fixed on the canyon below. The vastness of the world stretched before her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel small or insignificant. She felt part of something larger than herself, something ancient and primal. It was the call of the wild, the pulse of the earth beneath her hooves, the promise of endless possibilities. The stallion had shown them the way, and now it was up to them to keep running, to keep living, to keep pushing forward. The wind picked up, sending a cool breeze across the plateau, rustling the sagebrush and carrying with it the scent of distant rain. Sierra closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the scent, the feel of the wind against her coat. The scent of rain was rare in the desert, a sign that the earth was offering them its blessings. She breathed deeply, savoring the moment, knowing that this was a gift, one that she would never take for granted. The foal, sensing his mother's stillness, paused as well. He turned his gaze toward the horizon, his young eyes wide with wonder. There was a kind of innocence in his gaze, a purity that only the wild could nurture. It was the innocence of a creature who had not yet known the weight of suffering, who had not yet experienced the harsh realities of the world. But Sierra knew that would come soon enough. The world was a tough place, and nothing was guaranteed. But she would do everything in her power to protect her foal, to help him grow strong, to teach him how to navigate the wilds, to survive. She would be there for him, every step of the way. The stallion gave a soft whinny, as if to say that it was time to continue. Sierra nodded, turning her gaze toward the wide canyon below. There was no time to waste. The world was waiting for them, and they would meet it head-on. Together, they were unstoppable. The trio moved forward, their hooves carrying them further into the heart of the desert. The journey was long, and the challenges they faced were many, but with every passing day, they grew stronger. Sierra and her foal learned from a stallion, who taught them the ways of the wild, the subtle cues of the earth, the signs in the wind, the language of the land. They learned to read the stars at night, to find shelter from the sun during the heat of the day, to survive on the sparse vegetation that the desert offered. They learned how to navigate by the moon, how to find water when it seemed scarce, how to trust in their instincts and in each other. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The foal grew steadily, his body becoming lean and strong, his coat shining in the sun. Sierra could see the change in him every day. His legs longer, his movements more fluid, his confidence growing with each new challenge he faced. He was no longer the trembling, frightened foal she had once carried through the desert. He was a wild creature now, born of the land, born to run with the wind at his back and the sun on his face. Sierra, too, had changed. She was stronger now, not just in body, but in spirit. The journey they had undertaken had forged her into something new, a creature of the wild, a mother who had fought for her foal's survival, a survivor herself. She had faced the darkest moments of her life, moments when she thought she had lost everything, and yet here she was, standing in the vast, open desert, more alive than she had ever been. And she knew that the journey was far from over. There was more to discover, more to learn, more to conquer. But for now, in this moment, she was content. She was free. And so, They continued on, a family forged in the heart of the wild. They were no longer bound by the chains of captivity, no longer bound by the tracks that had once tried to define their lives. They were wild, and nothing could take that away from them. Not the tracks, not the fear, not the cruelty of the world. They were free, and that was all that mattered. Their story, though long and difficult, was only just beginning. The world was vast, and their place in it was yet to be fully discovered. But one thing was certain. They were wild, they were free, and they would never be stopped.